Welcome everyone to Webinar Wednesday, GED Mathematical Reasoning High-Packed Indicators. I'm June Rahl, Director of Florida IPDAY. Our presenter today is Bonnie Gooden. Bonnie is a national trainer who has worked extensively with the GED Testing Service, as well as providing training throughout the United States and of course in her home state of Florida. Although today's workshop focuses on high-impact indicators for our GED programs, it is important that we connect what we are doing in our ABE classrooms to what's happening in our GED preparation classrooms. That is why I'm excited to announce one of our newest resources on the IPDAY website, ABE Lesson Plans for Math. It's all about integrating number operations, geometry, and even algebraic thinking into our ABE classrooms. Each lesson plan is aligned to the Florida standards of the Florida Mathematical Curriculum Frameworks. The research-based lessons have been developed with everything that you need to teach the lesson. Each lesson provides objectives, a step-by-step process, hands-on activities, and even handouts that you can copy and provide to your students. Spend a few moments reviewing these exciting new resources. As always, I want all of you to know that IPDAY is hard at work to provide you with fresh new resources that are developed by adult educators and for adult educators for you to use immediately in your programs. On behalf of all of us at IPDAY and the Florida Department of Education, we thank you for your continuous support and all you do in helping our students becoming one step closer to becoming college and career ready. Now, on to our webinar.
Thanks, June. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to talk about these things called high-packed indicators and their importance in developing curriculum, specifically in our math programs. We're also going to discuss strategies, how you can incorporate high-impact indicators into lessons, and even show you a new lesson plan that's coming to a center near you. And again, as always, we're going to share resources and ideas. So let's get started. High-impact indicators for mathematical reasoning are really an essential tool to help us develop our math curriculum. But what are high-impact indicators, and why are they important to us? Well, let's look at first what makes an indicator high impact. First of all, they're important skills that are widely applicable throughout all of the different areas of math. And according to the GED Testing Service, often they currently receive coverage that may not be as heavy as we'd like to see it. But also a high-impact indicator lends itself to straightforward instruction, something that's very important in our classrooms. When we first started talking about this new GED test out there, we were all provided assessment targets, and GED Testing Service told us this is what is on the new test. So, assessment targets are those things which describe the general concepts that are assessed by the GED test. But now we have something called indicators. And indicators are those fine-grained descriptions of individual skills that are contained within an assessment target. Now, that sounds perfectly wonderful to me, but what I want to know is what my students need to be able to do. And if they do it, how can I see that they've mastered that indicator and through that assessment target or not? So what we have is application, and that's what we should be looking for in our students' work. Okay, how did GED Testing Service identify these indicators? Well, these indicators, first of all, were identified after GED Testing Service had extensively analyzed test taker performance on the operational GED test. GED Testing Service has had so much information by using a computer-based test. And so what they did was they examined the differences in performance between the 140 to 149 range, those test takers who just barely missed passing, and those test takers who did pass with a 150 to 159. And what they did then was subjected the results to different types of mathematical filters. So, what does a high impact indicator look like? And how can we use it in our curriculum? Well, first of all, you have all of this information in a guide that was sent to you prior to this webinar. However, if you don't have access to that right away, you'll notice that on your screen there is a word that says handouts, and that handout says 2. So if you click on that, you will notice that you have the webinar handout and you have the webinar presentation. The presentation is the PowerPoint that we're using here. The handout is the guide that we're going to be referencing in a bit. So if you'd really like to see more instead of looking just at the screen, go ahead and download both of those documents before we proceed. So this is one type of high impact indicator. And as you look at this, you can see that the assessment target says that students should be able to apply numbers sense concepts, including ordering rational numbers, absolute value, etc. The indicators give us a little more, it drills down to what students really should be able to do. Can they order fractions and decimals, including those things on a number line? Can they apply number properties? Can they apply rules of exponents? These could very easily become the objectives of our lesson, but we're going to dig down just a little bit deeper so that I can evaluate whether my students can do what the indicators say they should. When I look at that application area, it's real easy to see, can a student do it or can they not? So as I look at that, okay, I want to check whether my students can convert fractions to decimals and vice versa. And can they compare them in ascending order? Well, that's something I can very easily see. Can my students do it or can they not? Now, one of the things that I personally wish that GED Testing Service had done initially was to add a few sample questions for me to see, okay, what does this look like in a GED question type? So what I've done is pulled together a couple sample questions for each of the high impact indicators. Most of these questions come directly from questions that GED Testing Service says we can use to practice with students as well as in workshops. Just note that for those areas that we couldn't locate questions, we've provided some samples, and I'll indicate which ones of those are samples from different materials versus those from GED Testing Service. But when I look at this particular high impact indicator, the first thought that goes through my mind is, well, maybe it's a really, really difficult question that GED Testing Service is using to make sure students have those basic number operations and number sense. So I went ahead and went to GED Testing Service and found that this was one example of a question that was assessed by that specific high impact indicator. And you know what? When I look at this question, I say to myself, you know what? Our students really should be able to do simple number operations because that's all this question is asking us to do. And this is a sample question from GED Testing Service that they use to show all of us these are the question types that could lead to a credential. Now remember, on this new GED testing test, there are really two types of questions. Some of the questions are very much meant to get that credential for our students. They're the kinds of questions we expect them to be able to answer to get up to that 159, 169. Then there are also questions that GED Testing Service has which are indicative of those students who get the with honors. The problem is sometimes we worry so much about those questions that are more complex, and so do our students, that we forget that a lot of the questions are like this. And if students are missing them, they're missing them because they are not spending enough time closely reading and doing the computation. So, a sample question. I couldn't find a question which basically showed fractions in order, where they had to select lowest, highest, but I'm sure it looks something like this, where students would have to first arrange the fractions from the smallest to the largest in size, and then look at this chart or table and determine whether the answer was A, B, C, or D. In fact, after this webinar, you may want to take that question and see if you can figure out the answer. So that's one important high impact indicator. Please know as we go through today's presentation, if you have questions as we're going through some of these slides, please put them in the chat box or in the question box. If you put them in the chat box, then what we will do is we'll answer all of them either as we go along or at the end of this broadcast. Either way works. So that's one high impact indicator. Now, the next one, and no, my math isn't quite that bad. I didn't click from Q1 to Q3 and miss Q2. It's just that Q2, although we should cover it, it didn't fit the filter for a high impact indicator. So when I look at this specific one, it's basically, can my students calculate and use ratios, percents, and scale factors? Wow. That is something that we continue to hear from our instructors that students do have problems with. And yet it's very much an adult basic ed skill. If you've been attending the math workshops that have been conducted throughout the state by our math trainers, you'll know that this is the type of skill that, first of all, they taught last year in those workshops at the ABE level, and this year that they're digging deeper into it. So there again, what are some sample questions that we can look at and say, are they really that difficult, or should our students be able to answer them? This one should look familiar. It's from the item sampler on the GED Testing Service, and it does indeed reference these high impact indicators. When I look at this, I think, what a real-world example of percent, where students have to figure their commission rate if this person sells so much worth of merchandise. Now, you'll notice that it's a multiple-step problem, where students have to not only determine that they've got the $285 base salary, but then they have to figure the percent and add it all together. You'll notice that this isn't difficult numbers, it's an even number percent, but it is indicative of the kinds of questions that our students should be able to answer if they've mastered the skills out of the high impact indicator Q3. But there's more to it. This is another example from GED Testing Service, and it says, this graph shows the number of new and used car sales and leases in the U.S. from 2004 to 2010. And the students are asked, which year did the car sales and leases have the greatest decrease? Well, we haven't always talked a whole lot about graphic literacy, but there again, students need to look and determine greatest decrease. Not that difficult, but a question type that maybe we need to focus on a little bit more. This next one also should look very familiar to all of us because, again, it's a sample question from the item sampler on the GED Testing Service website. This one really is a problem, not only for our students, but sometimes when we use it in a workshop for us as instructors as well. And the problem is that we get so involved in that first part of it and the chart that we sometimes forget to read closely. The probability of rain on each of the 3 days is given in the table. Based on the table, what is the percent probability that it will rain all 3 days? You know, I very quickly know whether my students could answer this question or not if I say, do you think the probability will be greater than 45%, less than 45%, or about 45%? And if they tell me it's about 45%, I know that they have used that wonderful calculation of averaging rather than probability. And all we have to do is tell students, you know, it's like winning the lottery. What is the probability that you will win? Extremely low. So what's the probability it will rain on all 3 days? much lower than 30%. Another high impact indicator out of quantitative reasoning is, can our students calculate dimensions of two-dimensional figures, perimeter, circumference, and area, very much again an adult basic ed skill, and can they do the same thing and with surface area and volume of three-dimensional figures? This is one of those areas that many teachers have said to us, oh, I have a real problem with that one. Students just don't understand. Well, never fear. We're going to provide you with, at the end of this webinar, an actual lesson plan that helps you teach your students surface area of three-dimensional figures in a different way outside of teaching them the formulas, which oftentimes they quickly forget. When I first saw this particular problem, which supports this particular high impact indicator, the first thing that went through my mind was my students would say to me, but you know what? I don't have a formula for a tree wrap of that shape. And the other thing is, because there's so much information there, what do I use? Well, if my students have close reading skills like we've talked about in the past, then my students will know that they need to look at the table for tree 1, and they need to look at year 13 to get some of the basic data to use. From there, if my students really understand that three-dimensional figures I can actually unwrap into a two-dimensional figure, then they will very easily see that all they're doing is calculating the area of a rectangular shape. So again, another example of the high impact indicators for 3 and 4. A teacher we were working with last week said, you know what? My students came back and said, I didn't know the formulas for many of the shapes they were giving me because they were really strange looking shapes, and you didn't teach me those formulas. Well, in our real world, we have something called composite figures, and that means that our students need to be able to cut those figures apart and get them into shapes on which they do know the formulas, such as this one, where students need to know the formula for a trapezoid and a formula for a rectangle. Again, very much a high impact indicator skill, but also one that we know is a most missed area, not only on the current test, but also on the test in 2002. So many of the skills that our students had difficulty with on the old test have also returned for this one. Again, another example of a question that would be assessed through quality indicators. And this again is having students figure what the volume of each drinking cup is. Now, the only thing I'm going to tell you that many of us have seen is that sometimes students are not given the actual volume or surface area on the test, but rather they're given that information and all but one part of the data, such as this pretty easy one that deals with what is the missing length, a missing piece of data. And again, this is the type of question that comes from a GED Testing Service where students have to figure out the missing length. All I would have to do is look at this and say, my students may not see that there are actually two missing lengths, two x's, the same length, but twice over. So I'm sure that when they look at it, they don't have all the data in order to determine what the missing data is. Okay, those are the high impact indicators for quantitative reasoning. And so as you look at these, please make sure that you use these, but more importantly, that you check your materials and have these types of questions that, again, assess what a student should be able to do for these areas. But we all know that on the test there's more than quantitative reasoning. There's also algebraic reasoning. Please know that many of the questions, or I won't say many, there are some of the questions in both of these areas that are destined to allow students to be really prepared for post-secondary ed because they are of that complexity, but not all of them. In fact, when I look at the different high impact indicators for algebraic reasoning, there are many of them that our students really, if they don't know, they can easily be taught. Here's one of them. Well, graph linear inequalities. Write, manipulate, and solve linear inequalities. Some of those may be just a little bit challenging. First of all, it's the fact that inequalities can be difficult for our students, although the concept of inequalities occurs in our ABE classroom when students are working with whole numbers and then, of course, going into fractions and decimals. It is a part of our real world. So as you look at these different high-impact indicators, think about what kinds of questions you think the GED Testing Service would develop to assess whether the test taker has mastered these skills. Here's the first question. Oh, this looks familiar, as oftentimes I've had to plan for meetings, or for those of you who maybe you've had a wedding or you've had a graduation or something, and you had a budget that you wanted to use and you didn't want to go over that budget. And so Annie here is planning a business meeting for her company. She's got this budget of $13.25 for renting a meeting room at a local hotel and providing lunch, and she expects 26 people to attend. She also knows the cost of renting the meeting room is $270. So the question is asking you to determine which inequality describes the situation. Okay, if I were teaching students how to decode this question, I'd tell them, okay, first of all, we know that the total cost of the lunch has to be accounted for, and so we're going to use the term 26x, where 26 is the number of people at the meeting, we know that, and x represents the cost of lunch per person, which we don't know what that is yet. Okay, I then need to combine that with the 270, that cost of renting the meeting room. Then I'm going to compare that to that 1325. And because I know that that's the maximum amount that can be spent, I'm going to insert the less than or equal to symbol. It's a lot of words to teach students, but that is telling students how you think through the process, something we often call making thinking processes visible. Okay, most of us have used number lines for just so many things. You know, we use number lines when we're first teaching what is larger, what is smaller. We may use number lines for positive and negative integers. Well, we also can use number lines for inequalities. And so here again, this is the type of question that we have access to from GED Testing Service that shows how difficult or how easy some of these questions can be that do indeed assess this specific high impact indicator. Okay, sometimes it's substitution, and again, a different type of question. And when I look at this one, I go, oh gosh, students have difficulty with this? Well, as I was looking at this question, saying, okay, it does assess that specific high impact indicator. What could be the difficulty students have? Well, it's one thing to set up all these wonderful algebraic expressions, equations, etc., but if students don't know about exponents yet, and when they see that exponent of 2, they continue to view it as a multiplier, even if they have the conceptual knowledge required of this type of a question, they're going to get to the wrong answer quicker because they see y squared, y being -6, and if they use it as a multiplier, they're going to say, ah, it's just -6 times 2. Again, one of those things that as we look at these high impact indicators, we need to analyze why and how our students are doing on it. Why maybe they're not doing as well? Are there other things involved? And how can we help? two more questions that deal with this specific quality indicator, which does ask that our students not only solve variable equations and analyze relationships. Again, this is shows an inequality greater than, less than. But again, it's not a difficult question if our students know how to decode this particular word problem. S steps from the pedestal to the head of the Statue of Liberty. The number of steps in the Washington Monument is 27 less than 6 times the number of steps in the Statue of Liberty. What have I seen students do? What I see them do is if 27 is the first number in the word problem, their mind often says, okay, then that is the first number that needs to go into my expression, rather than reading the whole thing and then decoding the problem into an algebraic expression. One last one, we're going to go back to that good old tree trunk, and just know that when your students take this test or when they take the GED Ready, oftentimes there is one scenario and multiple different questions that go along with this. So here, again, this question requires that students analyze a relationship of quantities. And I wasn't sure what that really would look like in a question. So again, I went to the site and looked at how GED Testing Service described this specific question, and I found out that, aha, this is what they meant, where students have to complete a linear equation that fits the diameter for tree 1, where X is the year and Y is the trunk. And they have to know to click on the variables, and again, off we go. For those of you who are wondering what it is, again, go out to GED Testing Service and you'll find not only the answer, but also how they got it. One last high impact indicator in algebraic reasoning, and this is that students are able to identify functions and non-functions displayed in graphs and tables, and that they're able to create functions in graphs and tables, as well as substitute values for variables and convert functional representations from one format to another. Functions sometimes are not taught in the, quote, front of the book, but often are at the back of the book. But they're not that difficult to teach. In fact, I know that Florida IPDA will have a lesson plan that provides you with a step-by-step for how to teach those basic beginning functional representations. But to get you started, this one says, determine which of the following are functions and why. No, this is not a GED Testing Service question, but it is the type of knowledge that students should have, that they should know that if the vertical line test doesn't work, basically that what's there, no vertical line can be drawn so that it intersects the graph more than once, which when I've got a squiggly line like this, it doesn't, that it is a function. The middle one, look at the top where we have that one circle, and then we also have the bottom. Okay, let's just take a quick look at that. We have this one, and we have this one. And guess what? I could draw a vertical line through both of those if I wanted to, and let's see if we can get a pen to do that. If I start drawing a vertical line, and please know that I don't draw straight lines at all, but it would go through both of those. Okay, that's one concept. Look at the last one. It says this is a function because no vertical line can be drawn so that it intersects the graph more than once. And there again, that works really well for us. Okay. And give me just a second. We're trying to get rid of the pen. There. Okay, last but not least, again, this is not a GED testing service question, but we tried to find something to talk about, is there something called functions in real world? Could I come up with something that did that? And so what we looked at here is the speed limit on federal highways is 70 miles per hour. The fine for speeding is $10 per mile above the legal limit plus an additional $40. What would your speed fine be if you were traveling 85? That is an example of a function where there again what we have is the speed, the fine, and again we can figure out the amount regardless of what we're looking for. So a simple route to go with functions. And having said that, before we continue on, what I would tell you to do, and we're going to just take a few questions before we go to the next part of the webinar, is that take a look at that high impact indicator document. You can either go to the URL from GED Testing Service, or you can go into your guide on pages 4 and 19. First of all, let's just quickly show you where the high impact indicator document is on the website. This is an example from GED Test of what this specific document looks like. And you'll notice that you have not only the high impact indicators for RLA, reasoning through language arts, but also the ones for science, the ones for social studies, and the ones for mathematical reasoning. All of those different ones are available for you to print. You'll notice that each of them gives you the assessment target, plus the indicator, plus what to look for in student work. What I would strongly suggest you do, you should take a close look at each of those and that you determine how are you really covering these in your classroom? Are they covered well, or are there gaps in coverage? And if there are gaps, how are you going to strengthen the coverage? What kinds of materials do you need? What types of lesson plans do you need to better provide your students with what they need? And that is the information to master these skills. Okay. The other thing that we had talked about was the guide, and so just so you know that it exists, you have a GED mathematical reasoning guide, and in that guide you have not only all kinds of materials that we'll talk about, but in just a bit we're going to talk about a sample lesson plan that you can incorporate into your classroom. And that lesson plan is going to focus on finding surface area, giving you everything that you need to conduct the lesson and showing you not only what are some prerequisite skills your students should have coming out of the Florida ABE standards for math, but also what are the assessment targets, high impact indicators for this particular lesson plan coming out of GED Testing Service. So, questions. And I do believe that before we can, I apologize because I ousted my particular slideshow here. But before we go on, I do not have access to the questions. I'm going to ask Joseph any questions that we need to answer.
All right, Mike, at this time we had one question that came in.
Thank you.
I'll voice the question. 1 second. So one question was, how can I get a curriculum? And this was asked earlier back in the earlier portion of your presentation, probably about 15 minutes ago. So I'm not sure if it's pertaining to any particular topic you're talking about at this moment, but it was, how can I get a curriculum?
That's an excellent question. What I'm going to tell you is that there is not a state-approved or GED Testing Service approved curriculum. What most folks are doing, depending upon whether they're in a college system, school district system, or a CBO, is most of us are creating our curriculum based upon a number of things. What we're looking at are the high impact indicators along with the assessment targets for this new test, because those are college and career readiness standards. And then we're looking at our students, who they are, the materials we have, and some of those additional resources that we can get from the World Wide Web or from other folks who are teaching. And from there, we are developing our curriculums. Now, there are some folks who have developed curriculums that they are using throughout their program, throughout their adult ed program. And that's wonderful. I've not seen full curriculums at this point, but I do know that some folks are doing it. And I would, tell you that for those of you who have a full-blown curriculum, please share, because that's what we need. But the other thing to me that's important about curriculum is we need to know our students. And so if I have a population of students that are very young, I probably, or I will, quite honestly, use different types of materials and lessons that teach the same concepts than if I have a group of students who are much more mature. How they learn is going to be very important in developing your curriculum. However, having said that, the skills or the high impact indicators are the same going back and forth. The one thing I will tell you that it's very difficult to teach when, quite honestly, all we have available are materials that start on page 1 and go to 301, because that doesn't always work the best for our students. So, to get you started, take a look at the assessment targets and see what materials you have for each of those areas, and then coordinate your curriculum that way. So hopefully that will start you with just a few things. Okay.
Okay, the only other question / comment was from Karen Miller. She had said, I am wondering about using algebra tiles to help teach some of these high impact skills. And she suggested a reference resource at mathbits.com that we will assess, and if we warrant that as being disseminated, we certainly can do that.
And Karen, you are a woman after my own heart. I used algebra tiles for years with students, and that way they really had a hands-on experience of what an x squared looks like. How do I factor? And I found that students learn those basic skills for algebraic reasoning much more quickly. There are many resources. There are definitely not only apps for students' smartphones, but as you were talking about MathBits online, there's also the National Library of Virtual Manipulatives online, which has a great resource for algebra tiles. And you can make your own, which I have, or you can purchase a set of them, a classroom set for $30, plus a book of step-by-step how to use them. It's about $70. So lots of options, but yes, it is a great way to integrate manipulatives and to teach those basics of algebra. So great idea. Thank you.
Okay, Bonnie, that concludes the questions that we have at this time.
Okay. One of the comments is, can we have instructions as to how to teach these question samples? You did a good explanation on one of them. What I definitely would have no problem doing, just give me a little bit of time, is to go ahead and put that step-by-step into the notes pages of the PowerPoint, and then have Joseph and June go ahead and put that up onto the IPDAY website. So, good idea. I will be glad to do that. And we'll just let you know when that goes out. All right. I want to take just a couple minutes to show you a selected high impact indicator and a lesson plan. And this high impact indicator is to calculate dimension, surface area, and volume of three-dimensional figures. And so many of us will teach this particular thing through formulas. And I don't know about your students, but my students would get to the test and they get so nervous, even though the formulas were there, they forgot which formula to use, etc. So in your guide, and again, you can get that guide by clicking on Handouts, that's on the right side of your screen, and downloading the guide. You're going to see the full lesson plan of what I'm going to share with you, just a few of the highlights. So I can teach students to calculate surface area using a formula, or I can teach them to find the area of each surface and add it up. Now, that's going to be really important because teachers that I've worked with who have done the second found that their students, when they got to the test or they got to GED Ready and they were faced with those strange-looking shapes that they didn't know what formula to use, if they found the area of each surface and added it up, they were much more apt to get it right. You know, great Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it well enough. So the lesson plan that will be posted on the Florida IPDA site, however, you are seeing it first in your guide, takes you a step-by-step of how to use nets to catch some skills. And no, a net is not a fish net like we have here, but it's a shape that's formed when you unfold a three-dimensional figure. And it looks something like this. If I look at this first shape up here, unfold it, and I fold it back together, I'm going to see that it's actually, now if I were, my student, I would say, what's a funny looking box, okay? But that box unfolded creates a two-dimensional shape. The second one, if I see that, my brain should say, if I fold it up, I'm going to get a square-based pyramid. And last but not least, this bottom one, if I fold it up, it's going to get this three-dimensional shape. Now, why is that important? Well, if my students look at that bottom shape on the right, that square-based pyramid, they may say, first of all, I don't know what type of a pyramid it is. I don't know how to figure it out. And yet when I unfold it, they very quickly say, that's a square and 4 triangles. I know the formulas for those. That's something I've been working with forever. So with the lesson plan, first of all, it's going to take you out to some websites that are wonderful. Math Interactives not only gives interactivity for unfolding all of these different objects into nets, but has a number of other activities that you can use in the classroom. You're also going to have a step-by-step process for showing students how to do something, modeling for them. Modeling how they could unfold this particular 3D shape and create a two-dimensional shape looking like this, where they could also go in and say, okay, what is this shape to scale? And from there, just like when we first taught area to the lower level ABE students, when we had them count the number of square units, that's where we start with unfolding a three-dimensional into a two-dimensional. After that, they learn very quickly that, I've got 5 centimeters times 10. Okay, I know how to do that. And then they add up the different surface areas. So, where are you going to find it? Well, coming soon. If you're interested in accessing this lesson plan or some new ones that are coming up within the next few weeks, all you have to do is go to floridaipday.org, click on that GED and AHS, click on lessons, and then start exploring. So for those of you who don't have your handy guide out, let's just take a very quick look at what you're going to see. This is the sample lesson plan, and you'll notice that it gives you the alignment like we talked. It gives you the materials, but then it gives you a step-by-step script so that you can go step by step. It gives you the different websites that will show you the different things you can use. In fact, we've had numerous teachers who have not only cut out sample nets like you see on the right-hand side of your screen, some of them have found that they actually have manipulatives in their classroom, plastic manipulatives, foam manipulatives of these different two-dimensional going into three-dimensional shapes. The other thing you have in this lesson plan are handouts, step-by-step, and no, we have not forgotten that many of us are not math majors. So for each of these handout areas that you see on the worksheet that you will give to students, such as question 2, which is a real strange looking shape, almost looks like almost a stair step. And my students would have said, but you didn't give me the formula for that. Well, never fear. For each of the handouts that your students have, you will also have a handout giving you not only the answer key, but a step-by-step for how to figure that out. That's what Florida IPDA likes to do, is to provide teachers with resources that are not only applicable to their classrooms, but provide them with the materials that they need so that they can be successful, sometimes in having to deliver instruction in areas that we're not always as comfortable with. So, having said that, questions. And if you will, please, just questions, chats, etc. We will answer anywhere. Okay, the question is, are these lessons Creative Commons licensed? Yes, they are. Anything that you find on Florida IPDA website is by the field for the field. So no problem at all. The links that we use, again, what we have done is, first of all, most of them tell you that they can be used for educational purposes. If they are not, then what we do is we contact them to make sure that we are okay. But all the handouts have been created by instructors, so absolutely no problem. So summing it up for today before we finish up is we do want to increase emphasis on those high impact indicators. And then we want to shift our focus from those rules or processes to that deeper understanding of the what. And we definitely want to incorporate instructional and problem-solving strategies and close reading, because that's very much a part of it. And then have high expectations for all students. So as we go forward, one of the questions that I have is, what determines if a curriculum framework standard is high impact? And what you'll find as you look at Florida's curriculum framework for GED prep is that their standards match the assessment targets of the GED Testing Service. And so as you look at those standards, you will see that marriage of the standards to what we're calling the high impact indicators. There shouldn't be a problem there, so good comment. The other question we have is, what is the Florida IPDA website or site address? And you have it on this specific slide. So it's www.floridaipda.org. And please note, as you are looking through the lesson plans right now, that the one that you're seeing in your workbook is not on the online yet. You, as for attending this webinar, are the first folks to see that particular lesson plan. But 10 new ones, as June told you, have been posted to the ABE Math site. 10 more will be posted in the first part of December. So what we want you to do, though, is really stay tuned, because the Florida IPDA e-learning courses are now up and running, and please make sure that you do access that, because new courses continue to be added. Make sure that if you've missed a webinar, that you know all webinars are recorded and are a part of the archive on Florida IPDA. Lesson plans, grab and goes, tips of the week, which are on the first page, just when you open up Florida IPDay, those things do change weekly, and they're always a wealth of new information. And please don't forget the workshops. In fact, the math workshop, which is currently being delivered in our state, those materials will be uploaded as well once the last workshop is done. And remember, although Florida does not have an actual curriculum, they do have the framework, the GED Prep GED curriculum framework that all of us need to be aware of. And also know that on Florida IPDay, there is a handbook for GED Prep instructors that provides not only a wealth of strategies, but also information for all of us to use. Okay, we have, I think, just a couple other comments. One is whether Florida uses the CASAS to place students into classes. CASAS is used here, as is TABE. We have a number of assessment tools. I will go out on a limb, but primarily our programs for GED Prep are using TABE or Wonderlic. But again, we do have a number of approved assessments that are indeed used. Okay, and thank you, Amy, for enjoying the video lessons that are online for both pre-algebra and beginning algebra. Again, those were developed by one of our instructors in Florida, and we love them too, so she'll be thrilled to know. Any other comments, questions before we finish for today? If not, on behalf of Florida IPDay, June, Joseph, and myself would like to thank you for being with us today. As always, it's a pleasure working with each and every one of you. As you know, we go into the season of many of us having some vacation time, some breaks. Please know that all of the things that you do every day are so welcome. Because of you, our students are realizing their dreams, and there really isn't anything better than to be able to know that we're making a difference in the state of Florida. So thank you very much. And so having said that, before we leave everyone, anything else that, June, you would like to say before we close today's webinar?
No, I think that's it. Just, stay connected with us. You can contact us through email or phone me or email me. So we would love to hear from you.
And so stay in touch to access more IPDay workshops and to make sure that you do get registered for all the webinars. Just go to the Florida IPDay website. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.